Hey friends, this is Michael Bohm with Youth Apologetics Training. Today I have a really special guest. I'm excited. This would be my first guest talking about the subject of creation and evolution. I've got Ian Juby here, also known as Wazulu. What is that? He is the president of CORE Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education. He's also the director of the Creation Science Museum of Canada. He's a member of Mensa, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Canada, and the president of the International Creation Science Special Interest Group for Mensans. What I'm really excited about is his YouTube channel, Genesis Week. He has somewhere around a bazillion videos, all of them about a half hour or so in length, on his YouTube channel, all very well done, all on the subject of creation and evolution. Very informative, but also very entertaining. He does not disappoint. You will not get bogged down and bored watching Ian Juby, that is for sure. He's also an international speaker. He's all over the place, bringing his, well, I'm not even sure if you do this anymore, Ian, but I know for a while there you were bringing your museum components around and going to different churches and talking to people. He's also has extensive personal studies in origins for about 18 years. And so I'm very excited to invite Ian Juby to the Youth Apologetics Training Podcast. Welcome.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Brian. Michael. I do way too many interviews.
Well, anyway, Steve. No, anyway. By the way, friends, his website, ianjuby.org. That's IANJUBY.org. Great website. Wazulu. What is with that name? What does that even mean? How did that happen?
I get that question all the time, actually. This goes way back to the early days of Internet. I'm kind of giving away my age here. But I was involved in a summer science camp in Ontario for 21 years, actually. I worked there, but started when I was 16 years old. So that was started even before the Internet, really, the Internet existed since the 60s, but nobody really knew about it till, early 90s, right? So anyway, when, do you remember the first instant messaging program called ICQ?
I think I was still probably about 2 years old. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. Well, ICQ. ICQ was like the first IM instant messaging thing, right? And so I was teaching at a high school in Ontario at the time. And all the students were like, "Oh, Mr. Juby, you got to get on ICQ." Okay, fine, whatever. So I signed up for an account, but Ian Juby, Ian.Juby, Juby.Ian, everything was taken that I tried to sign up for. And so I finally got fed up and said, well, I'm going to come up with a name that no one uses. So I came up with Wazulu Himbob. And sure enough, nobody used it. Nobody had that. And so it kind of stuck. So.
Oh, wow. So today, friends, we wanted to talk about the global flood. And, well, we're taught in our public schools that the Earth is billions of years old. And one of the chief ways that this is demonstrated to the students is through this geologic column, which was a creation of a guy named Charles Lyell. I spoke about him in a previous series. Charles Lyell came up with these it's somewhat of a fiction of these geologic layers that make up the surface of our Earth, each layer representing millions of years worth of time. And, well, Ian, let me ask you this really quick. According to the science textbooks, according to our public schools, how did these layers actually get there?
Actually, that depends on who you ask and how up-to-date they are on the more recent thinking within the evolutionary circles. Because originally, as Charles Lyell and others were proposing, was that these were gradual depositions. Either the land would subside, for example, so the land would sink and water would, lay down sediments. or a swamp would develop and lay down sediments and peat, and that would turn into coal. Others, would just suggest it was just plain dust deposition. It depends on who you asked and whatnot. Several years back, a world-renowned geology professor published a book called The New Catastrophism. Dr. Derek Ager was his name. And basically, he really despises creationists. He's dead now, but he despised creationists. And yet, here he was, now reverting back to catastrophism. And the whole point of his book was all these layers in the rock record were laid down by catastrophes. Now, he was suggesting a whole series of catastrophes, millions and millions and millions of years of catastrophes. But it's interesting that, he has now taken an about face, and this has actually taken a lot of sway now within the old Earth community now. That it's now been, it's catastrophes, but it's millions of years of catastrophes, not one gigantic catastrophe. And there's problems with that thinking as well, the idea that it's millions of years of multiple catastrophes, because you can tile the layers through a number of different methods and ways. You can actually tile those layers together into one short time span.
Like polystrate fossils.
That would be one. Polystrate fossils is one. Also, flattened fossils is another.
Could you explain those two things to the listeners?
Sure. Polystrate fossils, it's a poly for many, straight for the strata of rock or the layers of rock. And so you'll find fossil trees, for example, that have been buried vertically. They're actually going up through the layers. And I talk about this quite extensively in my chapter in the book. I've forgotten the name of the book all of a sudden. What was the book you were asking about earlier?
Rock Solid Answers.
Thank you, Rock Solid Answers. Yes, that book. So the entire chapter of that book, Rock Solid Answers, that I wrote was devoted mostly to the Joggins fossil cliffs in Nova Scotia, because there you'll see dozens and dozens of these polystrate fossils at any given time. And basically these fossil trunks could cut through as much as 30 feet of rock layers. And so that obviously those layers, didn't take even tens of years to be deposited, let alone thousands or millions. Forget it. It's just impossible. And they will, of course, contend that these were trees that were buried where they grew. Again, for multiple reasons, I disagree. One of the reasons is, again, coming back to the flattened fossils, the roots on these trees, for example, some of these stumps, not all of them, but many of the stumps have roots still attached, and the roots have been flattened from above. They've been compressed flat by incredible weight of dirt that was piled on top of them.
So, in other words, they're upside down?
Some are upside down. Probably 1 in 50 to 100 thereabouts has been my experience. I have documented and found stumps upside down. I'm not the only one. John Mackay from Australia, a geologist from Australia, has found them. Harold Coffin, a geologist from the U.S., has also found upside down polystrate fossil stumps. I myself found documented dozens of them at a coal mine here in Alberta, actually. And it was the most unusual thing. I to this day, I don't get it. Because I just showed up at the mine because there was all these copious amounts of dinosaur tracks, fossil dinosaur tracks. And I like showing up at dinosaur track sites just to study them, because you never know what you'll find, right? And boy, what I found was not at all on my list of, hey, you never know what we'll find. When we got there, this young geologist was taking me around the mining site, which is a huge mine. It covers like many, many square miles, absolutely huge. And the rock layers, if you can picture them, were laid down horizontally originally and then tilted up almost sheer 90 degrees, probably about an 80-degree sheer cliff face now. So you're looking at a cliff face of rock layers that have been tilted up 80 degrees. And there's all these dinosaur tracks on it. And we kept seeing these strange depressions these strange black depressions all over the rock face. But of course, they were all, very high up, 20, 30, 40 feet off the ground. We couldn't get to them. And we kept going, what is that? What are those? Until we finally found one at ground level, and it turns out it was an upside-down fossil tree trunk. And what we were looking at was the depression of the roots going into the stump, which was buried upside down. So it was a polystrate stump buried upside down in the rock layers. And there was dozens of these things. I've never seen the likes. So, again, it's good evidence of catastrophe. Last I checked, trees don't grow upside down very well. So, obviously, something major happened to rip these trees up and bury them rapidly upside down in the dirt, which then hardened into rock. And that dirt, interestingly, was walked on by dinosaurs as well. And so when it hardened into rock, it made these fossil dinosaur footprints as well. So, anyway, you got me off on a tangent. Oh, yeah. The flattened fossils. That was the other thing.
Oh, yeah.
So a common phenomenon you'll see in the fossil record is all the fossils almost invariably have been squished unbelievably flat. Archaeopteryx, which I'm sure you've seen Archaeopteryx, eh? The fossils?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's about the size of a chicken. But when it became a fossil, it was flattened into about the thickness of a chicken burger. This thing, like a tractor trailer would have a hard time squishing a chicken this thin. That's how much it's been flattened.
Oh, wow.
And that's nothing. Fossil fish from the Green River Formation in Wyoming, for example, are 1 or 2 millimeters thick. They've been flattened as well. So it's the same phenomena as throughout the fossil record. You see everything's been flattened. At Joggins, and I actually conducted some experiments trying to replicate this, the roots of the upright trees have also been flattened. They've been crushed flat. And what it is, these roots are hollow. And so what happens is, if you can picture it, the root gets flattened to a point where it actually breaks. It actually crushes the root, and the mud gets forced into the root. So it only squishes so far. And but the force required to crush these roots underground is incredible. And I actually set up an experiment where I made a hollow wooden tube and buried it in dirt and then compressed it to see what point it would fail at. And I forget what pressures I got to, but basically my equipment wasn't good enough. I was unable to crush them. And that probably represented about 100 feet of sediments buried on top of these tubes. So that gives you an idea here that these trees had not yet fossilized. They were still wood. They hadn't turned to coal yet, because you could tell by looking at the roots that when they were crushed, it was still soft wood. Coal doesn't bend, it fractures. And these roots weren't fractured, weren't shattered like coal. They hadn't turned to coal yet. They're turned to coal now, but they had not turned to coal when they were crushed. And so they've been squished flat while the wood was still soft. Obviously, while the dirt was still dirt, it hadn't turned to rock. And we're talking at least hundreds of feet of dirt had piled on top of these roots in a real big hurry before the tree turned into a fossil, before the tree or its roots had a chance to rot, before the tree or its roots turned to coal, and before the dirt had turned to rock. So we're talking like a huge catastrophe. Also at Joggins, and my good friend Vance Nelson here in Alberta, who also runs another travel and creation museum here in Canada, he's actually conducted experiments in this as well. At Joggins, you'll find solid tree trunks from a pine tree called the Corditalis. And these trunks, okay, I'm just showing in my hands here, trying to figure it out. So they're probably 3-foot diameter trunks that have been squished down to about 6 inches in thickness. Now think about that. Try and squish like a 2x4.
Man.
It takes an unbelievable amount of pressure. So we're not talking, a few hundred feet of dirt. We're talking like a mountain of dirt, probably thousands of feet of sediments were piled on top of these logs before they turned to rock, because they've been squished as a log, before any part of them had turned to coal, They're actually petrified trees now, the trees themselves. So before they turn to rock, before the dirt turned to rock. So what on earth is going to pile thousands of feet of dirt on top of these things in a real big hurry?
Well, clearly a typical small rainstorm.
Yes. Like we see every day, yes.
Over millions of years.
That's right. Now, the thing is, if you go up, say, 200 feet in the rock layers, okay, so these rock layers are all piled on top of each other. In fact, at Joggins, it's quite dramatic. It's about 20,000 feet, vertical feet, worth of rock layers that are piled up there.
Oh, wow.
So the thing is, if you start at the bottom and go, okay, here's a fossil tree that's been squished, so therefore we can deduce there's been at least, say, 300 or 400 feet worth of dirt piled on top of that log. In order to do that, all that had to have happened quickly before the log rotted, before the log turned to fossil, before the dirt turned to rock, etc. So now you go up 300 feet vertically in the rock layers. Well, wait a minute. 250 feet above those, we find another layer of squished logs, which were also rapidly buried and also rapidly squished. And that took through another 300 feet of dirt. So now you go up another 250 feet. Oh, look, more squished logs. And the entire Joggins Fossil Cliffs is like this. It's unbelievable numbers of fossil trees, the upright lycopods, which aren't trees. They're actually giant hollow reeds. And so you can start to see what I'm getting at here. Basically, it ties in tens of thousands of feet of sediments all into one event that had to have happened quickly, before the logs rotted, before the logs turned to fossils, before the dirt became rock, which it now is today. So how on earth do you get, even 10,000 vertical feet of sediments buried in a real big hurry? Well, there's only one way: a gigantic global scale flood. That's the only way.
Wow. Okay, think on that for a minute. What we're looking at here is tens of thousands of feet that are all interconnected, because you have all of these squished, petrified, or logs that are either petrified or turned to coal. They're all stacked up in layers that are interconnected with polystrate fossils, tens of thousands of feet. Now that completely goes against the idea of millions of years to pile up all these layers. This is something that had to have happened really fast. So tomorrow we'll pick up exactly where we left off here today. Friends, if you like these types of podcasts, come out to my website, youthapologeticstraining.com, and also the new website, answerreadyministries.com, which still looks pretty ghetto. I'm working on it, okay? And click on the podcast archive link. There you'll find over 500 episodes, and I'm adding to them every day. They're all free, and they're all for you guys. It's all on topics like on apologetics, worldviews, creation, evolution, cults, cult research, even subjects on the occult. All kinds of stuff that I think you guys will find fascinating. So check that out. And with that, I love you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow.